Welcome to the Digital Analysis of Chant Transmission Workshop Series. Please note that this meeting is being recorded. It won't be available for general viewing, but rather it is being recorded for the members of the DACT team who were not able to join us today. I'm Deborah Lacoste, Project Manager of the Cantus Database, Cantus Index, and the DACT Network. Today's workshop deals with issues surrounding the indexing of litanies in the Cantus Database. Protocols that are developed today and in the coming weeks will benefit both indexers and users of the chant databases in the Cantus Index network. And just to note, we have some manuscript inventories that have been sitting in draft form, fully proofread and ready to be opened up online, with the exception of what to do with the litanies. So we are hopeful that there will be some ideas today of how we can move forward. Before we begin, Dalhousie University is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. At Dalhousie, we recognize that African Nova Scotians are a distinct people whose histories, legacies, and contributions have enriched that part of Mi'kma'ki known as Nova Scotia for over 400 years. For our part in the DACT network, we are engaging Indigenous researchers and having them connect with their communities to better understand the singing of chant throughout parts of their and our past. For those of you who are not familiar with this project, the Digital Analysis of Chant Transmission, or known as DACT, is a collaborative project that aims to extend the study of the dissemination of plain chant from localized research focused mostly on Europe and the Middle Ages to global research tracing transmission to other continents through to the modern era. We always do want to acknowledge our funding. DACT is funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, with support from Dalhousie University, the University of Waterloo, where the Cantus Database is housed, and the Digital Research Alliance of Canada, formerly known as Compute Canada. Before I introduce Dr. Iniesti and Dr. Albiero, I want to let you know about our upcoming workshop. It's going to be number 14. We've called it Protocol Development, Alleluias, CAO, and the Cantus Index. We might do all those things. We might just do Alleluias. We'll see what we have time for. I announced this on the agenda as well, but I put the time has changed since yesterday, so things are fluid here. But the date is Friday, April the 28th, and it will be it's going to be at 11 a.m. Atlantic time. It's Atlantic Daylight Time now and Eastern Daylight Time, and I think everyone will have switched to the time zone by that time. And then our workshop today is co-hosted by Dr. Alessandra Iniesti and Dr. Laura Albiero. I'll give you a bit of a brief introduction to each of them now, and then I'll pass it over to them. Dr. Alessandra Iniesti obtained a PhD in musicology from McGill University in 2022. Subsequently, she held a postdoctoral position at KU Leuven within David Byrne and Lenka Vlakova's CELSA research project called Musical Interactions Between the Low Countries and Central Europe, 1400 to 1650. From April 2023, that's coming up by mid-April, she'll be in Oslo. She will collaborate as a postdoctoral researcher on Catherine Bradley's ERC project, Venedicamus. She holds a previous PhD in philosophy from the University of Padua from 2010. She has collaborated on the Cantus Database and Cantus Index since the inception of her PhD studies at McGill in 2014, when she was hired as an RA within the SIMSA grant project, and that's where she worked on the Cantus Ultimus development.
I was going to be concerned, though. I think this is just...
Dr. Laura Albiero graduated in musicology from Pavia University, received her PhD in Latin paleography, that's in Rome at La Sapienza, and her diploma in manuscript studies at the University of Cassino. She has worked as a researcher at the Sorbonne University in Paris and at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, and has been a visiting fellow at the Bodleian Library in 2016, holding the Albie Rosenthal Research Fellowship in Music, and also a senior fellow for Fragmentarium in 2019-2020. Currently, Dr. Albiero is an associate researcher at the Institut de Recherche et d'Histoire des Textes in Paris, Aubervilliers. Her research interests cover medieval liturgy, paleography, pneumatic notations, liturgical medieval fragments, and the relationship between text and material aspects in medieval manuscripts, especially breviaries from the 13th to the 15th centuries. I'll pass it over now to Alessandra and to Laura. I'm going to stop sharing too.
Thank you so much, Deborah. And I apologize for my voice. I have a cold, unfortunately. But I will share immediately my screen. Here. So good morning and good afternoon to everybody. I'm glad to see so many people today because I have big hopes that we will be able to solve and to come up with a solution to a problem that has been tormenting us for a long while. And luckily, at this point, we can benefit from things we have learned over the years, working on chant items that share structural features with litanies, these multi-sectional forms with refrain. Now, I will soon hand the floor over to Laura, whom I must thank warmly for accepting to co-present this workshop with me, offering her huge expertise in liturgical matters and in chant. Now, with this short introduction, I just want to show you how we have organized this workshop so that you know exactly what to expect and what we expect from you. As I mentioned, Laura will soon take the lead and discuss the main points about litanies. So structure, repertory, etc. Also touching upon the fuzzy boundaries between litanies and preaches. After that, I will walk you through some of the Cantus Index protocols currently in place, and I will highlight the difficulties that indexers on Cantus database and other chant databases linked with Cantus Index encounter when dealing with litanies. Finally, since Deborah recommended that we send you off with missions, we will present in some detail 3 specific issues that we will provide matter of discussion in some detail, matter of discussion for the breakout room session. And these 3 missions, which you will have in your handout, will be to provide feedback for our indexing proposal of a litany, to discuss genre ambiguity involving preaches, and to discuss genre ambiguity involving antiphons. Naturally, you're not asked to deal with all 3. Please feel free to pick the one that sounds more interesting to you and to your group. And consider also dropping us comments about any topic discussed today later. We could also share a Google document version of the handout updated with your insights from today and leave it for discussion for the next few weeks if Deborah and Jennifer thinks it's a good idea. And one last thing, at all times, please remember that we look for practical solutions, which will entail likely a compromise between accuracy and simplicity of use. The method must be simple because collaborators on chant databases have a different level of expertise and they are often students. And with this recommendation, which I will repeat again at the end because it is crucial, I will hand the floor over to Laura and stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Alessandra. And I will share my screen right away. Yes. So we are talking about litanies. Thank you, Alessandra. And basically, I will talk about the problems and Alessandra will talk about the solutions, which is well-versed. So before starting, I want to just talk a little about what is litany, and there are some ambiguity in the terminology, so I will talk about this for a short time. So as you know, medieval litanies are a form of prayer that originated in the early Christian church and become more prominent during the medieval period. Litanies were typically recited in a call and response format. So basically you have the priest or the leader reciting a petition and the congregation responding with a set response, just as such as pray for us or Lord have mercy. However, the term litany can have some ambiguities, and scholars have indicated and intended different things with this term. Normally, a litany is a series of invocations sung at certain liturgical occasions. And that's the way we'll use the term litany today. But we have to know that litany can be intended in other ways. For example, prayers recited on Holy Friday, the series of prayers, can be called a litany. Sometimes the Kyrie eleison can be called litany because it is in a call and response format. And surely prayers sung during processions can be called litanies, and shifting the meaning from the text and the liturgical action, we can call litany the procession itself. And as you surely know, the procession of St. Mark Feast, so on April 25th, is called Litania Maiores, so the major litany. And usually the procession on Rogation days is called minor litany. But we have to recall that in the sacramentary, the Gregorian sacramentary, the procession on Rogation days can be called also major litany. So there might be a confusion between the two, and we have to be somewhat careful in indicating this major and minor litanies. We can find in manuscript other types of litany, as the Litania Trina, Quina, et Septena. This is just a term to indicate that the litany has to be repeated 3 times or 5 times or 7 times. And surely the Litany of the Virgin Mary, sometimes called Litanie Lauretane, which are the invocation for the different epithets of the Virgin Mary, such as, for example, Stella Maris, or Domina Dominantium, or Regina Celorum, etc. But we let aside all these different kind of litany and terms litanies, and we focus on the first type of litany. So the standard litanies can be found in different liturgical occasions. Most of all in Easter Eve, at the blessing of the font during the baptismal rite. Of course, it can be found in the visitation of the sick and dying, and in the commendation of the soul, in the dead ritual. We can find a litany, of course, in the major and minor litany, so in the 25th of April and Rogation days. And we can find litany also in the dedication of the church and ordination of ministers. So in the dedication of the church, there usually is one litany, but in some Anglo-Saxon pontificals, I found that there usually are 2 litanies. One when the bishop goes around outside the church 3 times. And the second litany is said when the bishop and the priest prostrate themselves at the altar and say the penitential psalms and the litany before tracing the alphabet on the pavement. And then the major, the usual litany is found after the penitential psalms. And it's said usually after prime, especially in monastic context, sometimes once a week or every day. And we can find litanies in other liturgical occasions, such in procession, for example, for Ash Wednesday. So we have all these different occasions. For manuscripts. So the Visitation of the Second Eye and Commendation of the Soul is usually found in rituals or manuals, while the Dedication of the Church and Ordination of Ministers are in pontificals, of course. And the others are found in different type of manuscript. The usual litany after the penitence of Psalms can be found also in private devotional books like the Book of Hours, and in breviaries, of course. So, what is the structure of a standard litany? So there is an introduction, there are invocations, there are the petitions, and the conclusion. So the introduction is usually limited to the Kyrie eleison, Christ eleison and Kyrie eleison. So this is the main introduction for a standard litany. The second and major part is the invocation. So we have the name of the saint and the response ora pro nobis or orate pro nobis if there are two or more than two saints. And this part invocation is generally structured in categories. So at the top we have the most important, so the Virgin Mary and the angels. Then we have saints grouped by categories. So the apostle and evangelist, the martyrs, the confessors, etc. And at the end, the women, so virgins. And at the end of each category, we can have a general invocation for Omnes Sancti Evangeliste, for example, Orate pro nobis, etc. After the list of saints, we have the petitions. So we have ab, per, and ut petitions, with the response for ab petition Libera nos Domine, for the per petition Libera nos Domine, and for the ut petition Te rogamus audi nos. And finally, we have the conclusions with the Agnus Dei and sometimes also the Kyrie eleison, which is repeated. So the two internal part, the invocation and the petition part, are very important for the localization of manuscripts. And so one of the topic which has to be discussed is how to index these parts, which Alessandra will show. So beside these standard litanies, we can find some variations inside a litany. For example, sometimes after the name of the saints, we don't have ora pro nobis, we have intercede pro nobis. And sometimes, especially in pontificals, we can have some invocations that are a little different from the standard ones. So this is a matter of reflection, of course, about indexation in Cantus. There is also a problem about praeces. So in the litanic prayer, so in the litany, we have these prayers that can be said before the litany or even inside the litany. So we will see that it is very difficult to find a proper place for these prayers. And we have also a problem of identification because sometimes these prayers are called antiphons. But in general, there are prayers in which the minister invites the participant to pray for different intention. At each intention, the assembly pronounces a supplication formula. There is a number of prayers that might be problematic to identify. So there are some that have been studied yet. And these texts are sung, so they have a melody that is written. And this is an example, Dicamus omnes. So this is a simple example because the prayer is has the same incipit in various sources, but the content can be very different, and the invocations can be very different, and the order of the invocation can differ from one source and another. So I will stop here for this general part, and I will let Alexandra do the following.
Thank you, Laura. Share again. I'm sorry if what I will say is already well known to some of you, but since dealing with our litany problems entails being aware of small technical details, I need to recall the most important classification protocols of Cantus Index. And before doing that, I would like to call your attention on what Cantus Index is and what is not. Cantus Index is a repertory of chant texts in a form that we could describe as abstract. Even though the version of a text comes from a specific source, its provenance is relatively unimportant. What Cantus Index wants is a specimen. Like when we choose a noun for our tabula neumarum, we pick one example, but we do not mean to refer to that noun in particular. The practical function of each chant text, of each specimen, to which we refer with a number, called the Cantus ID, is to connect all the occurrences of a specific chant across different sources. This will result in the searchability of this chant across all the manuscripts that have been indexed in Cantus database and in all the other chant databases associated with Cantus Index. And here there is only a few that could fit in, and this is the whole list of the chant databases currently linked with Cantus Index. All these databases, what is not of concern of Cantus Index is what pertains individual sources, although it is possible to create variants when a specific version differs significantly from one already in Cantus Index. There are specific instructions for this, which are available in the section with documents dedicated to contributors. Another thing that is not of a concern of Cantus Index is performance practice. This is another important point dealing with litanies, because the repetition of a refrain should not appear in the master version of a chant. And here's an example of a record with all the refrains written out. We do not want this, so this should not be there, because this sort of indications varies a lot from source to source. And here's another example, and here the refrain is Christe. This time, the text has been broken into individual records in Cantus Index, each one labeled as a verse that is PRCSB. This Christe should not appear there because of the same reason by which we do not include the repetendum Q of a respond in the record of the verse, for example. This doesn't mean that the indication of performance practice are not important, but they have their proper place, which is not a chant catalog, but is a chant database. And I will take the example of Cantus database to show how this information can be represented. These are the two text fields, both reflecting exactly what is in a specific manuscript. One with a standardized spelling, which is a kind of in between the abstract version of Cantus Index and a fully faithful version of the manuscript text field. The latter wants to reflect the source as much as possible. It reproduces the Greek characters of Christe and any other idiosyncratic feature, including a performance practice indication. I take the chance to emphasize that the text in the standardized text field matches word by word the version of the manuscript. This means that it can be a little bit different from the abstract version in the Cantus Index. If it is too much different, as we said, we need to create a variant. Now I will go over the different numberings in Cantus index. Let's have a look at how they work. As you all know, all the chants included in the Herzberg Corpus Antiphonalium Officii retain their original 4-digit numberings with addition of 2 zeros in front. Chants not present in the corpus, in the CAO, have received different numberings over the years. Before 2012, they have received 6-digit numberings starting with 10, 12, and so on, up to 90, according to the chant genre. For example, invitatories begin with 10. After 2012, IDs have been automatically generated by users, resulting into 2 parallel series, beginning with A for office items and with G for us items. Items associated with a parent record, for example, responsory verses, have a letter at the end, as also in the CAO. Finally, variants are indicated with a suffix, .1, 2, and so on. In addition to this basic system, there is a series of hymn text based on Analecta Hymnica, whose ID, oh, sorry, that should not have appeared now, which begins with the initials AH, followed by 2 digits for the volume and 3 for the text. And finally, starting 5 or 6 years ago, scholars of Hispanic chant have begun a dedicated series with numberings preceded by age. And this is what that table refers to. This series includes currently 56 IDs, some of which overlaps with other chant represented in the Cantus index, that is the Franco-Roman. This is the case of Psalms. I will spend a few words on this because it will be part of our discussion. For partial overlapping concern also few items labeled as PRCS and PRCSB. This is a thorny issue. On the one hand, Deborah is absolutely right in being willing to keep chants from different rights separate, which means with different Cantus IDs, even if they appear to be the same or a similar genre with the same text. And this is because, as she says, merging things is much easier than separating them once they have been merged. In this case, in case we change our minds, of course. On the other hand, it would be also true that an excessively rigid separation will impede the emergence of connections between repertories. Also, having parallel series of text might be confusing for some indexers who might not be able to choose the correct ID. Here's an example of the Preces Deus Miserere, on which I will return later because it will be the topic of your task number 2. But you can see that it's present in 2 sources. One is Hispanic and the other one is not. Now, it is time to turn to litanies and to present our proposal of indexes of a standard litany, as Laura described before. To do that, I will recall briefly the structure that Laura has just described before and walk you through the indexing process, showing the issues that arise. The structure of the litany is summarized here. Opening invocation, Kyrie eleison, followed by other acclamation to the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and the Trinity. And then a set of invocation to the Virgin Mary and the saints, subdivided into categories marked by collective invocations. And then a set of petition with refrain Libera nos Domine, another set with refrain Terrogamus Audinos, and the concluding invocation, Kyrie eleison and Agnus Dei. So let's see them more in detail. These are the opening invocations, invocation to the Virgin Mary, to the saints, and this is the set of collective invocations. And then we see here the set of petitions, Libera nos Domine, and the second set of petition with Terrogamus, and finally the concluding invocations. This is just to have a clear idea of how they look like. So how are litany currently treated in the Cantus index? So we have a parent record with genre LI, whose text has been taken from the official source specified below, the Graduale Romanum and the Liber Usualis. Then we have a series of associated items in the genre LIV, litany verses, which has the text broken into subgroups. These subgroups do not match invocations based on their content, not always at least, but follow a practical subdivision based on melodies, as you can see here. The main problem, however, is that these subgroups are not necessarily those that you will find in your source. So here's an example of a litany in a 13th century gradual. We have problems since the very start, because Kyrieleison is fine, Christeleison also is fine, but here I just have a Christe Audinos. So what should I do? Should I create a variant? Of course, it is possible that the Kyrie second is not repeated because they knew it was to be repeated, but we cannot make this sort of assumptions, and we need to reflect exactly what is in the source when creating an index. And there is also an extra Christe, Exaudinos anyway. So let's go on. All looks fine with the second set of invocations, the Father, the Son, Holy Spirit, and the Sancta Trinitas. But then this group, which gather together invocation to the angels and other saints, is problematic again, because we do not have Joseph in this source. So how to solve this problem? So far, the most common way was to create ad hoc variants that reflect the situation in a specific source. Here's an example. This solution is not ideal because these records would not be able to be reused for other sources, very unlikely at least. And they present an intimidating block of text. Nobody will be willing to read through all these versions in the faint hope to find an exact match with their source. And these variants are going to increase in number as the indexing of graduals proceeds. Thus, it might not be beneficial to have dozens of such variants in the future, even though they will all come up when searching the main ID 909041. This very same problem arises with all multisectional forms, such as hymns and sequences. And I will present now the solution that has been adopted for these items using a document that Ebra created. This one too is available online, this time among the documents for Cantus database, not Cantus index contributors. The solution entails the adoption of two methods of data entry. One has the complete text in one record, the other one separates the verses into multiple records. Here's the scheme for hymns. Text as a single entry with stanzas separated by vertical bars, hymns by verse with individual Cantus ID for each verse. The Cantus ID for the record is a single entry, is followed by a colon and progressive two-digit numbers. The proposal we are going to submit to you tries to adapt this scheme to litanies. We would like to include the whole text as from official sources, such as the Graduale Romanum, in one single entry, and then have single records by category in the way shown in the handout. And I will have a look at it briefly with you now. So this time, the two-digit numbers after the colon indicate sections rather than individual verses. The first section is the initial one with the Kyrie acclamations and invocation to the Father, the Son, etc. Then we have a specific section for Mary. This is because we thought if more acclamations are found later, we will be able to enter them continuing the sequence of letters. So H, I, J, etc. Then the saints, and here we would not create single records for every name, but retain the general form of the invocation. So Sancte Sancta, one saint with fellows, and more saints. Laura just let me notice that there might be variants such as intercede pro nobis rather than ora pro nobis, and these could be easily entered as variants of ora pro nobis. So with that point, .1, for example. The C treatment, the general one, applies to the very long series of Omnes Sancti. So I was pointing at this one to say that it is only in general with this ... There is not all the categories that we saw with Laura before, and that I also shown in my slide. Although we understand that some people might not like that we have spelled out the record by record for Mary and avoided making distinction for the saints in this case. So you will tell us if you don't like it. So now I will go back to my PowerPoint. Do you see it?
We do. It's great.
Perfect. However, just a few remarks to make about, to introduce case study number 2, which concerns the overlapping between litanies and preaches. Before the creation of the genre PRCS, scholars would perceive chants like this one, as litanies, even if found in sources of Hispanic chants. Now, I think it is difficult to deny that there is a relationship between these items, and this is the melody of the 5th invocation, just because one of the sources is a fragment and doesn't contain the previous section. Now, the main question you will be asked to answer is, how would you handle the indexing of these chants? The example you have in your handout for task number 2 concerns a text currently classified as PRCS, yet which is also found in sources that do not belong to the Hispanic rite, such as the Albig Gradual. We are looking forward to your feedback on this matter. And now I am done with my presentation, and I will just say some other things after Laura's last intervention about the discussion on breakup rooms. Sorry.
Okay, I will share my screen again. Just for presenting the problem of categorization and indexation of preaches. So I will present just a case study that concerns these 3 texts, Aufer Anobis, Exaudi Exaudi, and Miserere Miserere. These 3 texts are linked in some way, in different ways, in manuscripts, and sometimes, very often, they are put together in different orders. So this is a synopsis of 5 Aquitanian sources. And here we see that the order is not always the same. Sometimes we have Aufer Anobis at the beginning, and then Miserere, and then Exaudi and Miserere. Sometimes we have Exaudi at the beginning, and then Aufer and Miserere. So that's one point. The other is, how do we call these chants? So sometimes they are just included in a section called Litania, or just the feria seconda, feria tertia, quarta, for the Rogatians Day. Sometimes they are called antiphons. Sometimes they are called preaches. So we have the problem of identification of this kind of texts, because they are called in different ways in different manuscripts. And sometimes we have an antiphon, Exaudi Exaudi, with the antiphon verse, Aufer Anobis, and a verse, Miserere. So it's very difficult to know how to call this single text. Sometimes we have just the 3 texts, and sometimes we have the 3 texts that are interspersed with litanies, so invocation of the saints, and they are of course repeated by the choir or 2 or 1 or 2 more ministers. And this is just an overview for Aquitanian sources, but of course, if we look at other sources, we can find a different solutions. So the order changes again. Sometimes we have just a litany, a really standard litany with the Aufer, Exaudi, and Miserere intercalated between the litanies, between the invocations. Here also we have antiphons and preaches, and sometimes we have antiphon psalms even if it is not a psalm. Of course, it has a melody, and Exaudi is called a verse. In German sources, we have a whole different pattern. So we have a tertia litania with Aufer, Miserere, and Exaudi, simply copied one after the other. And in this other source, we have the Aufer, Miserere, and Exaudi that are repeated at the top and then interspersed with all the invocation of the saints. And finally, we have in two Italian sources, again, a different situation. In the Angelica 1 to 3, the antiphon Aufer Anobis is, so the three texts are mixed together in one antiphon. So there's no rubrics and there's no point, there is no capitals to differentiate the three texts. They appear as one antiphon. And this antiphon is put among other antiphons for the penitentia. And in the Reginensis Latino 334, which is a Beneventan source from Sora, we have Aufer Anobis is copied as a verse antiphon for the antiphon Respice Cuncta, and is followed by the Exaudi and Miserere as two other antiphons in the series of antiphons Pro Serenitate. So all these situations are very problematic when we have to find a coherent way to present them in a database. So in Cantos Index, we have for now two solutions. One which all the text together, and here are the list of sources where they appear. But of course, we have already seen that the order of the three texts are not always the same. And the second solution is to create a verse of the other text, starting from Exaudi. And that's the same, that's the same point that we have already seen. There is the problem of calling them an antiphon and or preces, and to index their order. So this is disappear as an antiphon verse, but it could be an antiphon. It could be the first antiphon. And so we have this kind of problem. And these are the sources in which this text appears. So we have currently two numbers in Cantos Index for these three texts mixed together. And I stop here for this case study. And Alexandra, you can.
Thank you, Laura. I will just say something very, very quick. And I have this last slide. Sorry. And I just want to remind you about what we are looking for and what we are hoping we can put together today and in the next few weeks, maybe. So we are looking for practical methods. And our system should be flexible, reusable, and intuitive for the reason I said before, that levels of expertise of people that index sources may vary a lot. So it's better simple than wrong, I could say. And finally, we can take a few licenses if this helps. So working names are fine. Genres can be different from the source. And also, exceptionally, the same ID can be associated with different genres if this helps, depending on how we decide to handle the PRCS topic. So thank you for listening and have a nice discussion.
Thank you, Alessandra. So I'm going to put everyone in breakout rooms. I think we'll do 4 people per room. So I'm just going to have it do it automatically.
Jennifer, can I just interrupt? Since we have
Sure.
on the handout, we've got 3 tasks.
Oh, okay.
And Alexander had mentioned to me in an email prior that if people would like to choose their favorite task, as long as we've got somebody on each, maybe we could make 3, and there'd be rather large rooms, but room 1 for task 1, room 2 for task 2, possibly.
Okay. All right. Sure. Okay. So I'll create 3 breakout rooms. Room 1, task 1, room 2, task 2, room 3, task 3. And I'm just going to have it assign automatically. So here we go. Hello, everybody, and thank you. So I think we'll just start. We'll go room by room to see what you came up with. Can everyone hear clarinet coming through my mic? So great. So let's start with room 1. So that was Alessandra, Anna, Barbara, Dominique Gatte, Itch, except he was actually with us, and Bill Duba.
So I will just say a few words and apologies because I pushed the wrong button. I was about to answer Anna's question and I wanted to get rid of the window, so I couldn't do that. And I will do it now. So she asked about the actual problem of not being able to search for a specific saint in the Ora Pro Nobis formula if you have the same Cantus ID for all the possible invocation. And this is actually undeniable. We could, we could create single records for each saint, but I'm not sure how many letters we would need. That's the problem. The only thing I can say is that the problem can be tackled by searching for the specific name of that saint and putting the genre litany verse. And in that, in this way, you will get all the invocations for Saint Lawrence, for example, or whatever. That's the way of handling this, I guess.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask Lisa to pose her question, but I just wanted to say very quickly that if in the Cantus database or in any of the associated databases in the manuscript version, you're going to have the name, right? So it's just that it's a single Cantus ID, but the name itself can be spelled out in the inventory of the specific manuscript, right? So then it could be searchable. Is Deborah and Alessandra?
You
Is
say
that correct?
searchable if you go to that database to search, but not searchable from the Cantus index itself. So if you go to each of the databases, you could do that. So it's just a little travel around the connected, but you'd have to go to the manuscript databases. If the catalog entry is going to have an N period for nomine or whatever, then you wouldn't get that name. But you could pull up, if the name is early in the record, like within the first, say, 4 words, 5 words, then in the Cantus index, you could do the search for this chant in all databases, and then the list would come up of all of that Cantus ID, and then you could see it probably in that little snippet view in the Cantus index, but the catalog record itself would have just the N, so that wouldn't be a searchable saint name in that spot.
Okay, Lisa.
Sorry, I just wanted to mention, I'm not sure if this has come up, but there is a project happening on litanies in books of hours that is trying to solve some of these same problems in terms of thinking about it's mostly interested in the lists of saints themselves. But I don't know if there's some kind of synergy that can be developed there between, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I feel like it's an ERH project, but I can't remember. Maybe Bill Duba. Bill, do you know what I'm talking about? I can't remember the details off the top of my head, but maybe.
I wish I did. Sounds great.
And maybe it was something Dominique Stutzman was working on. I don't know. I'll find out, because they may be developing their own classification system along for it's not chant, but it's the same, obviously related. So I will I will investigate and either put something in the chat now or send out an email, because there might be something useful there.
Yeah, about that, there was a database or a website of Gregory Clark, Beyond Use, but lately it's not accessible. So I don't know if it's still working.
Yeah, that may be what I was thinking of, but I feel like someone took that data and started doing something else with it, but I'll find out.
Thank you.
Okay, so those who are working on task 1, does anyone have anything further that they came up with in talking through that task from that group? I don't know, Anna, Barbara, Dominique, Bill.
I just want to say the very useful comment that if you've got a partial litany or just a fragment, that you would use the number 909040 star. And then I made the comment that the team who assigns the numbers and decides on them ought to consider the history of the litany as a way of deciding what kinds of things should get a separate number and what should not. So the structure of the litany, yes, but perhaps also the history. And this might help to sort out the antiphon praechus problem.
Great, thank you. All right, so room 2, we had Alberto, Dominique Crochu, Kate Helson, and Lionel. Would somebody from that room like to talk about your discussion?
Please, Katie, if you don't mind, it's easier for you.
Oh, okay. All right.
Please.
We were we were sort of batting around the idea of well, this if you abandon the Hispanic kind of association with crises, that was the third kind of bolded point in task 2. And Alberto and I were trying to figure out if there might be a way of using maintaining the designation that you find in the manuscript, while somehow also like being true to that, so that if anybody else finds it, or if somebody else finds another manuscript that has that indication, even if crises means something different formally in a Hispanic tradition or an Aquitanian tradition or whatever, that there would be some that you wouldn't lose that if you decided to call it something different for methods of categorization. But we were trying to figure out, like, it kind of depends on use case. So if you are just looking for the word crises and you only want to see it in Hispanic context, is there a way of refining that search or looking at crises in a particular provenance, a particular era, whatever, versus crises in another one, or even, you know, litany, and when Laura was bringing up things like, you know, is it a litany, is it an antiphon verse, is it an antiphon, like what even is this? There must be some way of not just abandoning what it's called in the manuscript, but making it sensible. And I was thinking maybe there's a way of like searching with text, that if you have a similar text, even if you're coming up with then different like nomenclature results, it'd be similar. Anyway, and then at the very end, I can't
Dominique.
I can't remember, who was it? No, Dominique. You were saying that there's also a kind of a whole other world here when we think about melodies and the way that musically and performatively they contextualize this stuff and help us understand it, and not quite sure how that interfaces with index, but maybe it has more to do with database, and maybe obviously there are links between those two worlds. So I hope maybe that's a good summary of what we talked about. Alberto?
Yes, of course.
Yes, yes, but yes, of course, thank you. We have already this overlapping of labels, Alleluia, Roman, Franco-Roman, and ALLK, capital letters to Aleluaticus. We can figure about maybe Preces, Hispanic, and other category, other label. It's another possibility with not not the same label for this different repertoire. It's a possibility. I don't know. Yeah.
So there's maybe a possibility of like if you have the same Cantus ID but with multiple genres that could be attached to it. I don't know how problematic that would be, Alessandra. I think you said it's possible, Deborah.
I think it's problematic, but my comment to Alessandra earlier about this, we've been talking about this for a long time, that if we keep things separate at this point, and I think Emma Hornby also wants to keep the Hispanic things separate until we really, maybe we never, but maybe we might know one day what will link and what won't. It's easier to keep them separate and try to make a search feature that will pull it all up, rather than combine them all together and then have to re-index manuscripts to separate out things once. Like it's harder to separate than it is to merge later. And keeping a separate genre category for it, like if we call it, if it's uppercase PRCS for the old Hispanic, the Hispanic version right now, maybe it's a different genre code and a different Cantus ID, but in each of those records, we have, you know, this other record, and there might be some way to make some kind of a combined table that would link those together, that I keep them separate in the indexing process, but have a way that we can tell that they either have the same, maybe they have the same melodic shape, or maybe they have the same division of the text structure. Maybe it looks like this is one melody that goes all the way through those texts, or maybe it looks like there's a repetition in the melody, and that would suggest that they're sort of like verses in a way. Now that we have, I'm just going to add one more comment to that. Now that we have a lot more litanies than we used to, like 20 years ago, they were maybe 2, because they don't really come up that often. It was pretty easy to identify what they were and just say LI and go away. But now that we have all these other forms, this is really important to kind of sort out how to deal with them. And then we will go back and apply whatever we figure out to all the other indexes where they have previously shown up. So having more is better, and having kind of concordances and other rights is really confusing, but probably, I'm going to say helpful, but maybe it's harder to know kind of what to deal with them. But the separation, I think, might be the best way to go right now, because I don't think we really understand all of what we're looking at yet. Or I don't, maybe you guys do. And that's why I'm here.
So we'll go to Franco in just a moment, but Lisa put a comment in the chat, and I think she was referring to the rubric comment of Deborah, and said that would help, although it leads us down the critical addition road, which is a major conceptual change. So that's been the main reason why rubrics haven't been included in the Cantus database, and instead we have these metadata fields with controlled vocabulary, because that is the way in a database to be able to bring things together. So there is, although I have to say, we've also heard from, and including one person in this room in a review of the Cantus database, mentioned how great it would be to have the rubrics in the database. Franco.
Thank you. When I look at the handout at page 2, there is a question about how do we deal with the several melodies from those examples, but I think they're the same. From the Codex 56 and Albi, this is the same melody. Is this about the different repertoires? Is the 56 Spanish? Then we have the same chant, and I would suggest we take Preces for all. It's something that comes from Gallican liturgy, and that's I see it in Cambrai. You see it in the Hailey wrote about it in his Western Plain chart, page 151. 151. He wrote about Cambrai and as a remnant of the Gallican liturgy, the preces. And we see here examples. I think the second example is Spanish and the other is Aquitaine. To my knowledge, the Spanish got our the repertoire from Aquitaine.
Of course, the reference to the different melody was limited to the refrain, because
But the Deus miserere Deus is the same.
no, it's repeated in the Aquitanian source. It is repeated. It's not. It has its own melody. So that's why I pose this question, which is not the main point anyway. But of course, that was my point of treating everything like preces. But we just said that this is problematic because if not everybody agrees on these connections between repertories, it is very hard to separate things after. That's what Deborah was saying, right? Otherwise, it would be very, very easy just to call all of them preces, of course. We could also, as we were talking about, to use different genres with the same IDs and maybe preces with lowercase letters. I don't know. That's another possibility.
Thank you. Should we move on then to task 3 and hear from people in that room? So we had Alison, Altstadt, Franco, Laura, and Lisa, who were given task 3, thinking about genre ambiguity 2, preces and antiphons. Is there someone from that group who'd like to summarize the discussion?
I will just start. So we discussed the genre ambiguity, and we all agree that the same text would have the same ID, even if in different manuscript is called in different ways. But at the end, we discussed the fact that surely we have all kind of variety in different sources, and this structure, this different structure should be clear, should be seen in the database. So there is that's very helpful to be able to find the same text in different sources, but it also would also be able to find different structure and the different ways that source present the same text. At the end, Alison was saying something very interesting about the fact that some saints in litanies are doubled. For example, in a Dominican litany, Saint Dominic is just copied twice or copied once with a bis or a 2. So I don't know if it's possible to integrate this information in the list of saints. And then she said something about, but I didn't write. Alison, would you please about female litanies?
Oh yeah, I've been looking at a source that has the Litania Infirmorum, and there's feminine language throughout praying for the nun who is at the end of her life. So how do we reflect that? Also, just a general question, then the source I'm working with happens to be fragmentary, but it would be nice to have it, because it is a Dominican source, align with a basic Dominican version to which I could show variants.
Yes, thank you. And I was just thinking that sometimes in litanies, we have some names that are just rubricated, and we lose this information, I think, in Cantus.
Are there still no fields big enough to give the whole text? That was the old Cantus problem.
We have full text fields, yeah.
Yes, but if Dominic is mentioned twice, then you put his name twice, or not?
Yes, yes. You can put the name twice, or just add the two.
Yes.
But if his name is just rubricated, for example, so just written in red or capitalized, I don't know if we can get this information in some way.
Even capitalizing is a possibility.
Yes.
It would stand out in the text.
What are differences between the Cantus Index catalog record and the Cantus database manuscript record is that we record the actual words of the manuscript in the database, Cantus database manuscript inventory, regardless of what's in the catalog record. That might have been the first time we found it, or it's what's in CAO, or it's what's in the Graduale Romanum or something. So that catalog record might have words switched. It might have a different replacement word that means the same thing that we don't figure as a significant variant. But in the Cantus database, we list all the words as they come in both fields. So the first field is like the standardized spelling, so that searches will come up. Searches for names particularly will be like the standardized name, but then the second field was an addition where we wanted to record as much as possible the performance indications, like the repetendum is there at the end of a verse for responsory and that sort of thing. So both of those records still will be what's in the manuscript database part. So we need to have a way in the Cantus Index to have kind of a template record for these things where you could build your Cantus, your manuscript inventory from those texts. So you would preserve what's in the source in those manuscript records, but they would be linked by Cantus ID. So if they're pretty close and you think it's close enough, then that Cantus ID number would be the way to pull them all up together. But we would have one kind of template situation where we could draw from to create these manuscript inventories. Does that help?
Yes, I think
how does that help the feminine language issue? Like, how does that, is that just in database then?
It would, I guess, you'd have to determine if it's a significant variant to create a 0.1, 0.2 number for any of those text variants. Having the Cantus ID number connected all together ultimately will bring it up. And then being able to search for particular words in the individual manuscript databases will then make it searchable. And I'm not sure on the technical part of if we could bring in all the manuscript reading texts from every source and put it into one spot. That's another way to have one place to search for everything that has all the text variants. So that might be something in the future. I see Itch nodding that could be a way to make it searchable from Cantus Index, both as a standardized kind of template text, but also every manuscript reading from all of them.
So we're at 11:25 now, and on our agenda it says we need to be wrapping up. Is there anything further that any other thoughts someone has about some of these issues? And if not, if you have further thoughts, when you're lying in bed tonight or tomorrow or over the next week or two, please do send your comments to Deborah or to Alessandra and Laura, and so that we can work to come up with a kind of a fixed solution in the databases. Franco.
I've come up with something that we might discuss in future. There's now an entry 850171 for the Christus vincit, Christus regnat. I learned that as a child, so I can remember those 6 words. It's an opening for a litany too. So it would be useful to look at that, and maybe it's task 1 and something from task 1. I could write a few words and spread it around. Yes.
That would be
Yes.
great.
That'd be
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you.
That number.
That's allowed as Regia, right?
Sorry, go ahead,
That's
Alison.
allowed as Regia. We can use the model that we decide for the standard litany and apply to all the others if it works. So
Right.
I think it does because it made a set of invocations. So it should work.
I was going to say from that number, I can tell that that's from like 15 years ago or 20 years ago. So that's something that we probably didn't really have many examples of, didn't really know what we were looking at. So we gave it a number, put it in the database, but that's the kind of thing we'd like to recatalog in the understanding of how these all work now that we have enough of a corpus kind of to work with and organize. So that'd be great. Thanks.
I filled the number a bit up this morning. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so our next workshop is going to be on April the 28th, and I think the final time we decided on was 11 a.m. Atlantic, which is my time zone. But nobody else's, so apologies for that. All right, so thank you, everybody, and we will see you on April the 28th. All right, bye.